Okay, hello. Welcome everyone to our first online education conference. I'm currently coming at you from my bedroom, so this is very different. So the theme of this year's conference is the inclusive classroom, which I think is very poignant for 2020. We think you'll enjoy all of the talks and workshops that we've got lined up for you today. So my name's Emma. I'm currently a film student at Edinburgh Napier. I'm in my fourth year, which is horrifying. Just started my dissertation. And I've been a Dyslexia Young Ambassador since, it's been a long time, since I was about 14 and I'm now 22, so a long time. So my co-chair today is the wonderful Kathy McGee, Dyslexia Scotland CEO. She'll be involved in facilitating the Q&A sessions between 1 and 2 today. So a note about the timings for today. All of the timings are on the conference webpage, and this will keep you right as we progress through the program today. If you're enjoying the conference today, then please tweet and post on Facebook using the hashtag DyslexiaConf20. So that's hashtag dyslexia and then conf20. If you currently aren't enjoying your day, which is just impossible, please email Helen Fleming, the conference coordinator, at helen@dyslexiascotland.org.uk. From the conference today, you'll receive your professional learning CPD certificate by email next week. I'm delighted to say that this certificate has the GTC's quality mark, as Dyslexia Scotland received the Professional Learning Award for organisations in September 2018. Please note any questions you might have while watching this morning's films, and please email them to kathy@dyslexiascotland.org.uk by 12:30. You'll also be able to ask questions via the Zoom session. We'll do our best to answer them, but if not, we'll reply to you later on. So first of all, I'm going to introduce our keynote speakers. I'd like to introduce you to Neil Mackay, who is going to be speaking about boosting the inclusive quality of your classroom practice and lessons. After Neil speaks, there will be a short comfort break before we hear from Yasmine and Suzette Clarke, who is speaking about the roller coaster of dyslexia from a mother and daughter perspective. After their talk, we'll have another short comfort break before you'll hear from Charlie Martin from the WISE group, and Charlie will be speaking about his dyslexia journey.
Hello there, welcome to Dyslexia Scotland's virtual education conference. My name is Neil Mackay and this is my keynote, Boosting the Inclusive Quality of Classroom Practice. I'm going to talk about a range of issues which are really the evidence-based habits of inclusive teachers. Put it another way, these are strategies to suggest when colleagues say, your kids can't, or I don't have time to. We all know those, is when colleagues sneak up to you in the coffee queue and bend your ear about various issues. So let's have a look at what the experts say. Really, this is standing on the shoulders of giants. I love this phrase. We're going to look at some of the top researchers. We're going to look at what Hattie says. We're going to look at people like Keith Topping, like Dylan William, EEF, all showing us how we can accelerate the progress of youngsters in the inclusive classroom. So my theme is boosting the inclusive quality of classroom practice. And let me explain to you how this mind map works. What you have around the inside, the inner core, you'll see a number of issues: not labeling learners, self-efficacy, self-reported grades, and so on. And underneath each of those, you'll see in a bracket 19 plus in 12, 18 plus in 12. What this refers to then is that when, for example, we concentrate on self-efficacy, there's a potential gain of 18 months progress into 12, which is really significant. Not labeling students, which is number one, there's the potential to almost double, 19 months progress in 12. So this is from the research. This is a combination of a lot of people coming together. And what they're saying is that when we do these things, our youngsters make more progress. We turn it on its head. What it also means is that when we do these things, we can afford to slow down. We can afford to get the basics properly installed because we can pick up the pace later on. So this mind map is going to appear a number of times in the course of our presentation. And you'll see in the red there, not forgetting phonics. I decided I wouldn't talk about phonics today, although I'm a passionate believer in the power of synthetic phonics, and I do presentations on higher order phonics and things. I actually believe we stopped teaching phonics far too soon. And as a secondary teacher, I was definitely into phonics with my guys. But again, phonics is a plus 18 months in 12 booster, and that's Hattie. It's many, many studies to go with that. I'm highlighting then not labeling learners, high expectation for 19 plus months progress in 12. Hattie, Rosenthal and Jacobson, they're all saying this is a powerful factor in learning achievement. So let's have a look at this as our first inclusive boost. So I'm identifying a feel-bad issue here as opposed to a feel-good issue. And the feel-bad issue are our students who think there's really no point in trying. I just can't do better. I just can't. This is linked to mindfulness, the work of various people in the field. And I'm going to try and look at this from the point of view of our youngsters. A colleague says, if only your students would try, if only they were more motivated. And in a sense, this is Carol Dweck's work as well. But I want to reference a book from quite a long time ago, Pygmalion in the Classroom, where the researchers Rosenthal and Jacobson decided to test labeling theory. And their research question was, can a label such as gifted have a measurable effect on a person's behavior, even when it's randomly applied? Let's turn it on its head. Can a label such as being slow, being uncooperative, not trying, have the same sort of effect? Now, Rosenthal and Jacobson didn't test that, but I think we can draw parallels from this research. I'm certainly going to try. When teachers expected that certain kids would show greater intellectual development, I mean, they did. It's the classic self-fulfilling prophecy. So what happened was that random groups of kids were brought together, and teachers were told that some of the students would be growth spurters. There was no reason for that other than they were randomly allocated that label. And the children lived up to teacher expectation. And glossing over it very quickly, what it means is there's a case for more aiming high, which is assuming capability. Another way of looking at it is that we must not allow weak reading, weak spelling, currently weak reading, currently weak spelling to limit our expectation of our youngsters. As I say regularly in my live presentations, it's much easier to teach a thinking child to read and spell accurately than it is to teach a child who can read and spell accurately how to think. So separating in our mind this business of accurate reading and spelling and intelligence is absolutely critical. The more we expect, the more we get. This therefore also drives us in the classroom to go for more differentiation by outcome. Now this can be quite controversial because in some teaching universities and schools, there is a view that differentiation by outcome is somehow lazy teaching. Absolutely absurd. Differentiation by outcome is providing multiple ways out of something that's showing what you know. It's a very hard thing to do properly, but it's also far more indicative of youngsters' progress than differentiation by task, which is almost inevitably self-limiting. So we give you what we think you can read rather than what we think you can think. And so death by 1,000 worksheets comes through this. Differentiation by outcome, our willingness to offer alternative means of showing what you know on the way to more formal ways really enables youngsters to overcome issues with core basic skills. This can also benefit internal assessments too. And here is a plea then for ensuring that, let's say in a 10-question internal assessment, at least one or two, if not more, require maybe stipulate a mind map, stipulate a flowchart, stipulate a storyboard, so that youngsters don't always have to do the writing. If we then analyze the results and we find out that this child gets more marks when they do a mind map or a flowchart than they do when they're doing a written answer, then what we know is that it's the question type which is the barrier, not knowledge or ability. Simply reading the questions out loud can have a huge impact on this. And a phrase that you will hear more often if you haven't heard it already is UD4L, which is Universal Design for Learning. This is coming in from overseas. And the idea here is that one of the strands of this is that we encourage multiple means of representation. So in our working class, in our assessments and so on, we actively teach a range. We teach mind mapping to mastery. We teach flowcharting, storyboarding, bullet pointing to absolute mastery so that youngsters can pull down the right one when they need it. And if we ask for these in assessments on the way to the more formal exam-based things, then they'll develop skills and competencies. In my workshop on writing skills, I'll show how easy it is for non-traditional means of evidence to be turned into traditional. So it's about thriving, not striving. I do want our youngsters to work hard, but I want them to thrive on the way. Teacher expectation is the key, and this is one of my favorite slides here, so I'll just change again. I'll just let you read that and see whether you agree, because it says it all for me. And in a long and checkered career in teaching, there's no doubt that the more I expected, the more I got. So we're going to look ultimately at issues with regard to memory, long-term working and so on, which brings us back to our mind map, which is going to form the essence of this presentation, and especially the right-hand side with our red arrows. So we've talked about not labeling. We've talked about how important labeling is in terms of expectation. And what we said is that when we don't label learners in terms of ability, our expectations, and so on, then there's potentially 19+ months progress in 12. As Hattie and Rosenthal and Jacobson say, it's a powerful factor in learning achievement. I'm not talking, by the way, about not labeling as dyslexic or whatever. I'm talking about labeling as not being very clever, not being very smart, and so on. So now let's look at a formative evaluation. This is potentially worth up to 24 months progress in 12. And the quote from the bottom there is from Dylan William, he Professor Emeritus at UCL in London, where he says, look, if we invest more time in formative assessment than in summative, we will do well. Assessment is for learning, I think, is one of the jewels in the crown of the Scottish education system. So let's have a look at that in terms of boosting the inclusive quality. So Dylan William would say that when implemented well, formative assessment can double the speed of learning. Now that's an incredible claim, and it's based on some pretty solid research. So my suggestion here is more chunking via what I'm going to call spaced review. I shall ask the question rhetorically then, why do we need formative assessment? And here is the reason, which is to defeat the dreaded Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And if you haven't seen this before, it is seriously scary. What it shows is that if we're teaching and we finish at break at playtime and we send our youngsters out to play, they actually leave 20% of our lesson on the table. They only actually leave the room with 80% of it. Let's imagine then that we actually teach them after break as well. We have the same group coming back for more of what we were teaching. But you'll notice that 20 minutes later, they only come back with 58%. So another 18% has disappeared somewhere. And it gets worse. If we don't see them till tomorrow, they only bring back about a third of what we were talking about the day before. And if we don't see them until next week, they only bring back a quarter of it. And this is why it can be so difficult to cover a curriculum, especially one which is very, very content heavy. And we all recognize this. You sit down with the group after break, the following day, the following week, and you're almost forced to start teaching all over again. And this is not for youngsters with any form of additional learning need. This is everybody, all of us. Fortunately, there is a solution. The solution is spaced review. And what this slide shows is that if we can build a number of reviews into our lesson, the forgetting curve gets flatter and flatter and flatter. So if I just did one review, I probably said, okay, come in, sit down, tell your neighbor 3 things you remember from last lesson. They're not going to remember much the following lesson. But if I end with a review as well, so we start with 3 things from the previous lesson, and we end with 3 things you really need to remember for next lesson, then as you can see, the forgetting curve is considerably flatter. This implies that they're going to bring much more back. Now, if we can actually get into 3, 4, or 5 reviews, each review slows the forgetting curve and it creates permanent memories. So what I'm going to present is a number of ideas. Now, I live in Wales and I do a lot of work in England. In England and Wales, we are nowhere near as far on as you have been in Scotland with your assessment is for learning program. So in one sense, I'm maybe teaching you to suck eggs, but I thought I'd present this just in case some of your colleagues are not using it as effectively as they might be, especially with youngsters who are dyslexic. So let's begin our lesson with a mastery check. I would argue strongly that there is a case for a policy that every lesson begins with a mastery check. If we don't do this, we don't know where we are with the class. We definitely cannot start from where we were last lesson unless we find out that everybody is on the same page. So this is our warm-up. So it could just be tell your neighbor. We all use this. Tell your neighbor something. We'll give you a question. Let's say 3 things that you can remember from, it doesn't matter, but we talk to your neighbor. Training our youngsters to come in, sit down and have a gossip about the last lesson works really well as well. So we've begun to flatten the forgetting curve. It begs the question, how do we work out when to do a review? So let's work on the idea of an hour lesson. And attention span is the key. Now, attention span, very unscientifically, can be worked out like this. A notional attention span is a class's chronological age plus 2 in minutes. So 8-year-olds is a notional 10 minutes, 10-year-olds is a notional 12 minutes, and so on. And that's on a good day. That's when it's not wet and windy, and so on and so on. So the idea of the review is if we work with 8-year-olds, for example, after 10 minutes, we're going to do the second review. If we're working with 10-year-olds, we'll do it after 12 minutes. If we're working with 13-year-olds, we'll do it after 15 minutes. And you know what? If we're working with 18-year-olds, we'll do it after 20 minutes. People always say, oh yeah, but my learners can concentrate for longer. Well, they can hold it together for longer, but I would argue strongly that the law of diminishing returns is kicking in once you go much beyond that. So 8-year-olds after 10 minutes will do a review, 10 minutes after 10-year-olds after 12 minutes, 13-year-olds after 15 minutes. So let's do review 2. Muddiest point, it's one I use a lot. This is a checking for understanding, misconceptions, and it's as much about how I'm doing as they are doing. Now, I usually do this as a pair activity, and I will say, look, if you're stuck, I'm there to help. But before I get involved, I want you to do this. I want you to see 3 before me. So when we do muddiest point, you have a chance to think, to talk, to share, and then you can actually get out of your seat and go and find somebody who you're pretty sure will have the answer. Who is wearing the mantle of the expert at the moment? And the message here is, of course, that the learning is probably in the room. Now, if it is in the room, go and find it. And of course, the subtext is that if you perhaps focused a bit more, you might have found it yourself. If the learning isn't in the room, then I've dropped a clanger and I need to unpack. So muddiest point works a treat. So now our third review, it could be after half an hour, it could be after 45 minutes, depending on your group. Once again, I'm going to check my impact. How am I doing? How are they doing? Articulate an answer is another favorite. I will throw out a question related to where we're at. And the rubric is 30 seconds silent thinking. You might brainstorm, you might talk to your partner, you might write down some thoughts. They might go on your mini whiteboard. You might then get the table to come up, formulate an answer, hold the board up. It takes about 2 or 3 minutes, 4 minutes at the most. But now we really know how people are going. And we also know if we have to backtrack, which is equally important. This could be a final activity. If I'm working with 13-year-olds, every 15 minutes, we get towards the end of the lesson now. This is a checking of my impact. It could be a lesson warm down. 3-3-1. Summarize today's topic in 3 short sound bites. Take the 3 sound bites to 1 word. Take the 1 word to, sorry, the 3 sound bites to 3 words, and take 3 words down to 1 word. And that 1 word could be shared with a partner, shared with a table, written up, held up, and we have a lovely summary of what's gone on. Now, by the time we get to the 4th review, that forgetting curve is pretty flat, and you can be fairly confident that next lesson, you're going to start from pretty much where you left off the previous lesson. And this is where the acceleration happens. Rather than always having to go back, always having to revisit, we're actually starting from a platform of strength. This is a powerful, powerful thing to do for reflection and peer tutoring. Now, secondary colleagues may poo-poo 2 stars and a wish. They may think, oh no, this is a primary issue. Couldn't be more wrong. I've used this in further education, undergraduate work, and also master's work. The trick here is to get learner A and B to swap material, and each scrutinizes their partner's work to identify 2 star features. And what's important is that the star features must be against the lesson objective. If you don't do that, you get star things like nice underlining or good handwriting, which is a complete waste of time. So they're going to highlight or dot or something 2 elements of that work so far that really, really nail the lesson objective. And then we come to perhaps the most important bit, whereas they're going to identify a wish, which is, I wish you'd done this because it would improve it. This is an adding value wish, again, against the lesson objective. And if you don't insist on the lesson objective, you get things like, I wish I wasn't your partner, which isn't helpful at all. Once we've done the stars and the wish, they go back, they swap their books back. And the key thing here is to give them time to respond. Time to respond to the wish, particularly, and maybe they can enhance the star. And what you find here is the value added is enormous, not only from responding to your partner's stars and wishes, but also looking at what they did and learning from it. So very powerful, well worth using in any classroom. A check for big picture understanding. This is 1 sentence summary. The idea is that basically summarize this lesson in one sentence. You can say it should be so many words, maximum of, total of, must begin with because is always good to get cause and effect, and so on. These slides are available and much more from Mike Gershon's website. I urge you to have a look at Mike's stuff if you haven't seen it already. Then he must have 60 or 70 of these slides. They're not all great, but many are, and they're well worth looking at. And of course, being in Scotland, you'll have access to many of these from your own sources. So for potentially 21 to 24 months progress in 12, spaced review works. We forget unreviewed knowledge very quickly, and our dyslexic learners are particularly vulnerable in this context. But when we check learning sequentially throughout a lesson, and when our learning check indicates that we are not having enough impact, we can then step back, we can regroup, we can rebuild. When we do this, basically what we're doing, of course, is we're teaching the child rather than the lesson. We're teaching the child rather than the syllabus. What we find is that they will remember more, they'll bring more back to subsequent lessons, and this means that we can accelerate later on. So the takeaway here is basically know thy impact. It's a Hattie phrase, and we notice and adjust as we go. Suggestion 3, have you tried? So this is looking at more research. This is also saying what else works, or, and this does sound a bit assertive, but I don't apologize for it. If you're not doing this, why aren't you? So these are the sorts of things that we can throw out in the coffee queue when we're getting our ears bent about our children not doing certain stuff. So we say, okay, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Let's see where we go. The discovery method is inappropriate. We really, really should not be using it, especially as an initial teaching approach. It's being completely discredited. We shouldn't be doing it. Discovery is fine once you're an expert, but many of our youngsters have discovered things wrong. They've discovered how to spell said, S-E-D. They've discovered how to spell they, T-H-A-Y. And once they've discovered it, it's going to stick. So we don't do that. And what the research is very clear as well. So as this animation goes, you'll see the power of worked examples. This is work from 2009. And what William discovered was that when learners are required to solve problems, those who basically had to discover how to solve them performed worse on subsequent test problems than learners who studied the equivalent worked examples. So our modeling, our presenting of exactly the right way to do it the first time is critical. And we can borrow from direct instruction a little mantra. If we say things like, who can tell me? If somebody tells us wrong, then they hear it wrong the first time. Who can tell me what a vowel is? And somebody says Z, we're in trouble. No, let's go for this mantra. I say, we say, you say. I do, we do, you do. So the very first time they meet it, they get it right. They should get it 100% right the first time they meet it, and the second time, and the third time. Once they're experts, they can discover. I would also keep them out of the learning pit until they are experts, because the whole idea of a learning pit is you tumble in, you fail, and you dig your way out. Once again, the learning pit is no place for a learner who is struggling. It's fine once you've been successful, because you can view your failure from a point of success. So no discovery method, please. No learning pit until you are an expert. Extended practice also, this is really backing up the point I've been making in the about space review. When we distribute practice throughout a lesson rather than at the end or even at the end of a unit, we're improving automaticity, memory, and transfer. What we're doing is keeping it uppermost all the time. So 2 key things. Worked examples, we say to our colleagues, are you modeling exactly how it should be done until they've mastered it? Are you distributing practice regularly throughout your lesson? Another very powerful one, and this is gaining in prominence, this is frequent quizzes. And what we discover with quizzing is when it's low stakes or no stakes, by that I mean it doesn't matter how you do, then learner-generated quizzes are really making a difference. Us quizzing, fantastic, but learner-generated, even better. When our learners are challenged to think like a teacher and come up with questions, it is so powerful. I'll touch on this in my reading workshop as well. So questions, open questions, what might, what could, what would happen if, how might you, these are the open-ended questions, incredibly powerful. These improving learning, memory, and retention. So retrieval practice is what it's all about. It's trying to recall information without having it in front of you. So here's an interesting piece of research where the researchers were in middle school social studies. What they did was they got the teacher to leave the room, and they did no stakes quizzes on 1/3 of the taught content. The reason the teacher left the room was so that she wouldn't know what was being quizzed. Now, at the end of the term, in the term exams, the students scored a full grade level higher on the quizzed material. So all they did was quiz some of the content, and that was much, much more accessible. It was retrieved more easily as a result. The power of quizzes cannot be underestimated. Slide 29. So my takeaway here is that low stakes, no stakes quizzing will accelerate progress. Suggestion 4 is to go for retrieval, not restudy. This is in response to the typical question, what can I do when my learners have been revising away and they just cannot remember what they've been doing? They've learned it the night before and they've come into school and they've forgotten it. And what you'll see is that retrieval study techniques are very, very much more effective than study retrieval techniques. Let's unpack this. Slide 31. So the question is to restudy and reread, or are we going to retrieve it? That is the question. And as the animation goes, here we can see restudy. We're learning some African words. Restudy is looking at it over and over and over again, rote. Retrieval is you have to do something with it, engages the brain. So the research that looked at this from 2008 found that the group that did most of their study in the form of retrieval remembered about 80% of the words. The group that restudied it, read it over and over again, averaged 36%. So not good at all. Supported retrieval is very useful. You'll see here that by just putting in some of the letters and leaving gaps works well. And the researchers say, look, induced retrieval is a very, very effective practice strategy. So in terms of revision skills for our dyslexic learners, this is without doubt the way to go. Let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. Let's look at restudy first of all, which is on the left-hand side of the slide, number 1. What restudy does is get you to focus on the information, the skill that's already been presented. And the trouble with it is that it bypasses the neural pathways. Now, it does actually appear to be easier, and it's immediately more apparently rewarding because, yeah, it's fine. And maybe after restudying, you might remember it. You might even remember it the night before, which you won't the night after. You won't remember it the day after, the week after, the month after. Let's look at retrieval then, which is the right-hand side, number 2. What retrieval does is focus on the previous neural activity. It reactivates the neural sequence. It revisits the pathways. And it's not just the end goal. The whole pathway is rehearsed. It locks the learning. It builds up the neural links. So practicing by retrieval creates long-term gains in long-term memory. It's just that it's harder. And of course, there's youngsters think, oh no, this is too hard. I'd rather do it the other way. Why does it work? Well, when we try and retrieve memories, which is the right-hand box there, we're reactivating the sequence of neural activities that is required in order to bring it to mind. We're really going through the whole process again. When we're restudying, which is the left-hand image, we're just focusing on what's already been there. It is rote. It's not engaging the brain at all. It bypasses all the neural pathways that go with it. Slide 35. So here are some references for your own study, if you want to pick this up. But my experience of supporting dyslexic youngsters to revise for internal tests, public exams, and so on, definitely shows that the retrieval process is the way to go. But you have to start early because it takes a long time. It's not a thing, it doesn't work for night before study. So we really have to get our thinking heads on and make sure they start early enough. Here are some retrieval responses. So I've made a case for low stakes quizzes. They can be on paper. Google does it, Canvas. Quizlet is great. Poll everywhere. Plickers, love it. But it's a learning strategy only. Forget the scores. I mean, the student can set themselves targets if they want, but really it's a learning process. Think, pair, share is what it says on the tin. Think of one thing you learned yesterday, pair it, share it. What's important is solo thinking before pairs, because that ensures the retrieval process. Putting ideas down on a whiteboard before you're sharing works well. You may have come across darts. These are directed activities related to texts, traditionally associated with the most able. Some brilliant stuff. Any sort of a closed passage is a dart. Paragraph strips I'll show you in a minute, but well worth looking at a dart for some really good ideas. Slide 37. So here is I'm going to model paragraph strips. This is the elephant paragraph challenge. Poor elephant there, feeling so irrelevant. I'll take that graphic away. And what you will see is a piece of information which is being cut into random sentence strips. This is an important piece. It could be history, geography, science, whatever you wish. So the group are presented with a pile of strips. You can get the class to cut up, or the groups to cut it up for each other. The task initially is to organize a flow. So in other words, make it make sense. So there's a lot of retrieval going on. And then having got the flow, the task is to organize it into however many paragraphs you stipulate. And it's also quite good to get them to come up with a paragraph heading for each one too. Because of the amount of thinking that goes on in this process, it really is engaging the brain, and loads of pathways are being used, and it is eminently memorable afterwards. So if you imagine a piece, a document which can be split up into enough chunks so that there's one for each group then cuts it into sentences for strips for another group, and off we go. Works really, really well. What you find is your dyslexic learners are right in the middle of this, because they get the big picture very quickly, and they're often driving it from a position of strength. More tips here. Spacing the practice, we know about. Short bursts over time. Struggling to remember locks the learning, especially if you give them a few clues. In a quiz, it's quite important to give feedback as they go along. I would probably give each answer as I go, because if they retrieve it wrongly, it'll lock the wrong learning. So quickly provide the right answer. I'm all in favor of open book quiz, open laptop quiz. It's more about right than wrong, and if in doubt, cheat. It's as simple as that. Cheating's good. Slide 40, actual research to support looking up and cheating, because what it does is help adjust student metacognition. They get a better idea of what they do know, what they don't know, and then they can do something about it. And also make sure that the quiz matches the assessment. You know, if it's basic recall, that's the quiz. If it's open-ended, then your quiz works the same way. And finally, you know, make it a feature. Get this one right and you can leave first. Get this right, you can go first in the lunch queue. Get this right, you can. And what we're really talking is flipping from reviewing information, which is rote, to retrieving information by going right the way through the process, which is the powerful way to go forward. More asking students to pull concepts out of their brain, which is retrieval, and less trying to put concepts in, and also less questions that really ask you, you know, repeat what I told you about. Back to the mind map, and let's have a look at the power of self-reported grades. What you'll notice down the right-hand side of this mind map are a number of red arrows. These red arrows are all about youngsters feeling better about themselves, because we are actually pushing them to exceed. And Hattie would say that self-reported grades is a very, very powerful way forward. At its simplest, you can just have marking boxes, and that's really the level that I'm going to take it today. So youngsters do a piece of work, they do an assignment, they do a test, they do a homework, and they have 3 boxes. If they think they've nailed it, it goes in green. Done okay, goes in orange, excuse me. I'm not too sure I've done too well, it goes in red. What this means, of course, is that we can mark it with more than half an eye to their perception. It's great for our girls in particular who suffer from perfection anxiety, who are quite likely to put a green piece of work in an orange or even red. Sometimes they do it because they know that we'll say nice things about them. Other times they just don't believe they're any good. And it's also good for the boys who are absolutely delusional, who will put a red bit in green because they think it's fantastic, when in fact it isn't. Self-reported grades is all about metacognition. It's about thinking about what you had to do, how have you done, and it is a very, very powerful thing. The final element that I want to pick up in this presentation is the power of peer tutoring. And this is the work of Topping, Hattie, EEF. There's been a lot of research into peer tutoring. What is key, of course, is that we do it the right way once again. And peer tutoring is often a thing which is, should we say, not done as efficiently as it might be. So let's have a look at this. Slide 46. So let's look at the power of peer tutoring. Potentially 18 plus months progress in 12. So it is a real booster. And research from 2010 shows that peer tutors show enhanced or increased personal development, motivation, and confidence. And that is the key to peer tutoring. I would say for much of my teaching career, I thought peer tutoring was the thing that benefited the child being tutored. And I would say, you know, Susie, John, you finished, go and sit down next to Neil and help him. In fact, that isn't peer tutoring, it's sort of unpaid child minding, and it doesn't work very well. The paradigm shift for peer tutoring, and this is one which we really, really do need to share with our colleagues because it's such a high-powered thing, is that peer tutoring actually is for the tutor. It is the tutor who makes the progress. Have a look at the peer tutoring toolkit from the Education Endowment Foundation from 2013. It's free. It's well worth downloading. The evidence, a couple of bits of evidence here. EEF reckon that it equates to about a GCSE grade. You can make your own equivalent. And Hammond et al. Make that point again. It's the peer tutors who show the progress. So the trick here then, in our sort of dyslexia context, is to use peer tutoring when a youngster is on the cusp of getting it. Basically, what they're trying to do is right on the outer fringe of their ZPD, their zone of proximal development. That's the place that you can't quite get to on your own, but you will get to with help, support, guidance from somebody else, from a teacher and whatever. So the conversation will go a bit like this. We say, Neil, you don't quite get, do you, how tectonic plates cause tsunamis? What I want you to do now is go into our peer tutoring corner for 10 minutes, and I want you to come up with a way of teaching tectonic plates and tsunamis to your table. Yeah, I'll accept a model, animated PowerPoint. You can do me a label diagram with the removable labels, blah, 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 blah. It presupposes, of course, that, you know, we've taught these skills. The youngster then comes back with something and teaches the table, and I can almost guarantee they've got it. One of my favorite examples, I can't show you now, was a youngster who was having so much trouble with hop becomes hopping and hope becomes hoping, you know, drop the E, double, and so on, this ridiculous rule. He went away and created an animated PowerPoint with suffixes flying around and dropping into the right place, came back, taught the table, and he had nailed it. So peer tutoring as a strategy is absolutely wonderful. Great for learning support assistants, get youngsters to teach you the phonic rule that you've been working on, give them the plastic letters, give them magnetic boards, get them to teach it, but give them time to prepare. It seems to be the key. And the paradigm shift, as I say, is that peer tutoring is for the tutor. get your colleagues doing this, and we are away. So I come back to my mind map. We've looked at the power of not labeling. We've looked at the power of self-reported grades. We've looked at the power of formative evaluation. We've looked at the power of peer tutoring. And what these things do is empower our youngsters, both in terms of self-efficacy and also metacognition. And the message to our colleagues is that we really do have time to invest in some of these things. Because if I just extract from my mind map the things I've been talking about, what we know then is that when we have high expectation, we boost learning. When we use formative evaluation, we use chunking, we use spaced review, we accelerate the power of learning. Peer tutoring does the same. Self-reported grades does the same. And what they all come down to is self-efficacy and metacognition. They support our learners to believe in themselves and to believe that they can do it right. So my keynote has been boosting the inclusive quality of classroom practice. The subtext was, what can we say, what we can suggest when colleagues come and bend our ear about the performance of our dyslexic youngsters in the inclusive classroom. And I hope you feel that the evidence-validated strategies that I presented will give you some ideas, some ammunition, and some strategies to recommend. Thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Yasmine and I'm a Dyslexia Ambassador for Scotland, and this is my rollercoaster journey through my dyslexia, my up and downs, and my good times and my bad times. My family would always describe me as being a happy and confident little girl growing up, who loved playing, socialising and attending nursery, yet within the first week of the big transition from nursery to primary, I very quickly realised it was a very different environment and not the same warm place I enjoyed in nursery. Instead, it was the opposite, where I would feel worried and anxious all the time, and I felt that asking for help would result in me being told off or doing something wrong. And I was often told I needed to stop being a nuisance, and all too soon, the happy, confident little girl who loved walking into school turned into a very different, unrecognisable character. I would suffer meltdowns every morning, which left me to feel sad and worried and terrified of the day ahead. See, for some reason I was yet to know, I felt different here compared to nursery, where I felt like an ordinary happy child. But now in school, I was made to feel like the odd one out, a black sheep in the herd. All the other children could do their work quite happily, without problems, and even give the correct answer if asked, but for some reason I couldn't. So for the first time in my life, I felt different, frustrated, constantly asking myself questions like, why couldn't I do the same as others? Why am I so different on the inside from my friends? Why didn't anyone tell me before? And if I am so different, why does my teacher have to make me feel so sad and highlight my plight to everybody? Making me stand out even further and isolating me from my peers, leaving me to feel so out of place and so very alone, like the alien in the room. It wasn't until primary 3, when I was 7, that the school employed a new learning for support teacher who quickly diagnosed me with dyslexia. If I'm honest, at that age, I never really knew or understood what dyslexia was, but I did understand that it was the answer I had been looking for but given up on. And to me, it was the biggest relief ever. I was sad that there was something wrong with me which made me different from others, but at the same time I was happy that there was a reason for my struggles and I wasn't just stupid, which is how I've been made to feel and even been told by my teacher. As I progressed through primary school with the help and support after being diagnosed, I was reassured before taking the leap to high school that the learning support team there would even more support me and be better equipped with a full-time learning support department available to children like me. This was something I was looking forward to because my small primary school only had a learning support lady that came in once a week. I was informed before I started high school that there was nothing to be worried about and the transition would be effortless as the teachers would be notified of my dyslexic needs in the classroom and be aware of things I felt uncomfortable with doing, for example, reading out loud. On my first day of school, I didn't feel nervous. I was reassured by my new teachers would be told about my dyslexia additional support needs in the classroom. However, this was short-lived. I was picked on by the maths teacher, made to read out in French, which bearing in mind I could hardly read in English, never mind a different language. And this resulted in me bursting out crying to my English teacher, who seemed to be the only person that understood and had actually taken the time to read my notes. My first weeks at high school were simply awful. Every day I dreaded going into the classroom, and I lost all my self-confidence and felt so unhappy and totally drained. I came home after school totally exhausted and would literally collapse. Being dyslexic came with even more challenges as I grew up, meaning that for me and my mum, it was a never-ending battle, trying to get the help and support I needed. I'm very lucky to have a mum that fights for my rights and will never give up on me, even if that does occasionally mean I have to listen while she stands up to teachers to push for extra support. I know for a fact that if I didn't have my mum helping me, I wouldn't have received half the support in school that I'm actually entitled to, but was never offered. I probably would have failed all my exams. I would not be able to take the career I have chosen. But unfortunately, not every dyslexic has a mum like I do or someone to fight for their rights. And this makes me feel sad to think that there are dyslexic children out there struggling to get the basic support they deserve and by law require and are entitled to. Through my dyslexic journey, I've had ups and downs, and I would never have thought I would have become a Dyslexia Ambassador for Scotland, which is definitely one of my biggest achievements and highlights to do with my dyslexia. It makes all my struggles with dyslexia seem so worth it, as now through personal experience, I can help and inspire the younger generation. Being a Dyslexia Ambassador also means that I am on a bigger platform like talking to you today and being able to share my story. I have met both young children and adults that adore being dyslexic and even describe it as like having a superpower, that they believe their dyslexia makes them stand out from others and makes them unique. They also stated that it helps them with their jobs, as it makes them feel like they're creative and imaginative, and they wouldn't change it for the world. Unfortunately, I am yet to feel the same way and find the positives in my own dyslexia. Instead, I am presented with more negatives than positives, especially in the school environments. I live with a large amount of worries and anxiety caused from past experience in the classroom, and always have to work so much harder than my friends and peers. Still to this day, I get worried in case a teacher asks me to read out loud from a text passage in class, or dread when a teacher asks me to swap work with others, in case they are unable to read my spelling or criticize my work. I worry these things will never change, and will affect me also as I grow older. I also find it frustrating when my friends so easily grasp and understand new things compared to me. However, I try not to compare myself and hope that one day I might just feel the same way and learn to harness my superpower and see dyslexia as a gift and not a curse. From my story, some of the important things I have learned and would like to share with you as teachers are: 1, you could make this massive difference to a dyslexic child's life. You could be that inspirational person that a child can look up to, because believe me, we remember all the special people in our life and who make a difference and who care for us, and you will never be forgotten. 2, be very careful in what you say. I know dyslexics can be frustrating as we don't grasp things as quickly as others, but one negative comment, just one, can stick with us for the rest of our lives. Believe me, I can remember every nasty comment I was told, and I was only 5 at the time. 3, we need more breaks, and if we look like we aren't concentrating, it's probably because we're exhausted. Believe me, we have to work so much harder than the average student. When every other child is playing because they have finished their work early, a dyslexic child is still trying to catch up. 4, if you find a child may be dyslexic, please get them help. The earlier they are diagnosed, the sooner they can feel fully supported and get help in the classroom. Homework is a horror to the child and the parents. Please take this into account when setting homework. We are simply too tired and need home to not be a classroom. I can personally remember all the tears that would be shed over homework, especially when it came to reading. I guess other children could do it on their own, but I couldn't, and it was more my mum's homework than it was mine. Tell other children about dyslexia. It really helps know that our classmates understand, and a good way of doing this is to make it normal and show famous dyslexics. Show the positives and not the negatives of dyslexia. For example, Dawn, who is Innes's mum, who is also a Dyslexia Ambassador for Scotland, she did such a good presentation for her school that a child actually went home crying to his mum, saying that he wished he could be dyslexic because it sounded so great, and that he was sad that he wasn't dyslexic. So make it like that, make it positive. Lastly, if you are dyslexic and you're watching this, you will get through this. There is always a light at the end of the tunnel, and do not under any circumstances let negative people get you down, because believe me, they're not worth it. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Suzette Clarke, Yasmine's mum, and you've heard from Yasmine, so I just wanted to add a little bit to her story from a parental perspective. Hopefully you now have a better understanding of the difficulties a dyslexic child faces in our current education system. And I'm sure you will agree, from a parental perspective, supporting a child through school is never easy. However, for a dyslexic child, it is much, much harder. I could not be prouder of Yasmine and wouldn't change her for the world. But I wish we had known what we do right now from the very start. It's been incredibly hard making sure Yasmine had the correct support at school. In fact, if I'm honest, it's been a real battle. From the start, when having our home and family life put into question by teachers, to the end, where we're still in the middle of a major complaint for Yasmine through lack of support in a particular subject at school. Schools are generally under-budgeted, and in our experience, learning support departments generally focus on children with behavioural issues. This leaves children like Yasmine unsupported and totally overwhelmed. Teachers like you are so incredibly important. You're the dedicated professionals, the ones who are left to pick up the pieces and to recognise their potential and nurture it. And if you are a parent of a dyslexic child, my advice to you is never, ever take no for an answer. Seek every little bit of help that you can lay your hands on. Never give up and know that you are not alone, and help is available. We were told in primary school that Yasmine would be lucky to make it to 4th year, yet here she is. Finished 6th year, she's worked incredibly hard to get here. She's achieved the seemingly impossible, taking her advanced higher English this year and gaining her dream place at college. A dyslexic child needs so much more than just educational support. Anxiety and a lack of confidence go hand in hand with dyslexia. As a family, we have been through some hugely tough times. The future didn't always look this bright. In fact, we've had to battle for every bit of learning support, both educationally and emotionally for Yasmine. It's taken up huge amounts of our family time. And without support groups like Dyslexia Scotland, it would have been a much harder journey for us. The rollercoaster ride will never be over, but I hope we are now in a better place to enjoy the highlights and focus less on the low points of this journey. If we have anything left to share with you today, it would be to say, dyslexics are like tropical flowers. They are different learners, but with careful nurturing, their growth potential is huge. Treat them kindly, understand their needs, let them grow and flourish. You will be rewarded with the most beautiful outcome and be remembered forever. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I hope you're enjoying our virtual conference so far. I want to start off simply by thanking Kathy and her team, not only for the invite to come along and have this opportunity to chat with you today, but actually for the resilience they've shown in pulling this together, because so much work goes into organising a conference, and then all of a sudden COVID comes along, and what happens? We have to do the conference digitally. So resilience has been all about how we recover from COVID, and the resilience that we need to show people going forward is how we will all recover, and hopefully next time we have a conference like this, we'll be in the room and we can meet each other, and we maybe not necessarily shake hands, but we can meet and greet and have proper conversations. So your presence here today, virtual as it is, tells me that you're already interested and you have that obvious interest in dyslexia and how it affects people. So it would be a bit pointless of me sitting here and propagandaing to you about what we have to do about dyslexia. So rather, what I'd like to discuss today is the impact that dyslexia has had on my life, and maybe get you to think slightly about the societal costs of unfulfilled potential for people. The title of my presentation today, if such a thing exists, is It's Never Just Black and White. And you're probably scratching your heads and saying, what's this guy on about, never black and white? But it's really about asking people to continue to look outside of the parameters that we've all been conditioned to follow in life. And please, if you will, never forget the most powerful of all the Socratic questions. Number one is why, followed by, how can I help? And obviously, what can I put in place to support people? And as I tell you a bit more about the impact on my life, you'll hopefully have an empathy and an understanding of why I feel that those questions are so important. So I want to tell you really from the early years of how my life has kind of been affected. I had a couple of disadvantages when I started school, and number one of those disadvantages was I was a year younger than my peers when I started school. And as educationalists, I'm sure you'll understand that whole difference in development between a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. So I was a 1 year behind my peers at school, and I felt isolated from the start. Secondly, I was the 7th child of 8 very high achieving children, so expectations on me by teachers who had previously taught my siblings were fairly high. Unfortunately, I struggled early on with getting the whole reading and writing thing. And the one thing that always struck me, well, I'm saying it always struck me, it wasn't so much later in life that it struck me, that I think part of the difficulty for me, and I'm going to refer back to it's not all black and white, but we had a teacher writing on a blackboard with white chalk and asking me to copy that with a black pencil onto white paper. And that kind of mixed me up a bit. I kind of got, I got confused at times, and I was slow. And they started really kind of branding me as being lazy. Because one of the other things that was a factor in this was, for some reason, I was very good at arithmetic and counting. And again, as I think back as a youngster and analyse how that happened. When I was 3 years old, I was given a gift of something called a set of Cuisenaire rods. I don't know if any of you know about Cuisenaire rods, but basically they were coloured pieces of wood, about 1 centimetre square up to 10 centimetres long by 1 centimetre square, and they were used to teach you to count. And what helped me in that counting and learning to count and calculate was the vibrant colours of each different value, and the fact that you could actually build a sum, if that makes sense. And so the tactile nature of working like that was really good, and I had an aptitude for it. But because of that, the expectation was that I would be just as good at English and reading and other things, and it never kind of worked that way. But I found myself being even more isolated and ridiculed by people at school, and you know, that isolation is painful. You don't want to talk about it, you don't want to share it in case it becomes even more of a problem. But as life progressed and I went on to secondary school, it became even more difficult. I had real problems in processing information. I could read a document or a page 10 or 12 times and still be unable to recall what I had just read. And I often felt, as I went along here, that teachers were picking on me, and maybe that was a self-perception, but it became even more isolating in terms of, I guess, the fact that when you go to secondary school, you know, you've kind of graduated from a class that you grew up with for 7 years in primary, and then you go off to this huge building that like it's something totally you've never experienced before, and you meet people from different areas and different other schools, and so the isolation becomes even more. And of course, at that age, 12, 13, kids are cruel. Kids are really cruel. I guess it's part of life and growing up. But they want to be in little gangs and they want to belong, and by the very nature of that, they will look for other people to isolate. So I kind of guess I felt I was being made to look like a fool all of the time at school. And one of the other real problems I had was that because I was struggling to cope with all this new learning, I started to experience real severe headaches and mental exhaustion, which kind of debilitated me even further, made me feel even more isolated, and actually didn't want to flag it up to any of the teachers because I was already on their radar as being a bit lazy and a bit stupid and really not worth investing time in. Allied to that was a real pain within myself of not being able to reach other people's expectations. And that pain just was magnified by continuous failure, and I guess my self-esteem was the big sufferer in all of this. I didn't realise at the time, but I was depressed. My mental health started to deteriorate, and I became more and more disengaged from my lessons and from my peer group. I also at that time discovered something called Ascot powders. And I don't know if any of you remember Ascot powders. They used to be advertised as Mum's Little Helper. But they relieved the headaches, and somehow they also relieved the pain. But I still had these continued feelings of inferiority and a lot of self-loathing, I might add, into the equation. And so it wasn't too long before I started to truant from school, dog off. And I guess, you know, one of the things that happens in life when you're in that position, you become a bit of a millstone and a bit of a nuisance to teachers. Because if you're that disruptive kid and they've got another 25 or 30 kids that they're trying to help, it's actually not so big a loss if you don't turn up for class. Maybe I'm being unfair, but no one seemed to report my truancy or do anything about it. Guess what happened next? You know, so you're running around in your own devices and you meet other people. You know, like finds like in life. So you meet other people who are truant, and what do you do for excitement and to fill your day? You kind of get involved in a bit of shoplifting because it's fun, and it escalates because then you find a way to make money because you can steal goods and you can sell them, and then you can buy things that you want, and actually you start to find your level, if you like, within hierarchies of communities, you know. So all the dafties are still going to school, but you and the gang are running wild and you're making money and you're having the time of your life. But of course, along with that came stronger drugs than ascot powders. And it starts generally with smoking a bit of cannabis. Along the way, and this is coming in from the side, you know, one of the ways my head works is that I talk about something, but there's another idea coming. And sometimes I've just got to capture them, because if I don't capture them when they're there, they're lost and gone forever. But I might mention within the context of all this going on, there was some real trauma going on in my life. By this time, I had lost both my parents. My mother died when I was 4, which is why I went to school early. So I was kind of really out of control. And I was fostered for a while, and within all that there was abuse of physical and emotional and sexual stuff going on. And so I found that to hide that and heal from it, and my way of thinking, more drugs and stronger drugs were the way forward. So I became addicted. I spent a long number of years coming in and out of drug use, and I'm 20 years in recovery, so I think I'm probably okay now. It's only taken me 60 odd years to get there, but hey ho, do you know, as long as you get there in the end, that's kind of what matters to me. But do you know what? Along the way, your crimes start to increase in the severity and the seriousness and the magnitude. Just grow and grow and grow. And along the way, you know, I had kind of little jobs here and there, a bit of work and then a bit more of addiction and not working. But I graduated into very, very serious levels of crime. And there'll be no surprise in letting you know that along the way, it resulted in some serious time in prison. Yeah. And it was in prison that really I had the opportunity to get off the roundabout that was killing me. And do you know, if I were to ask all of you people, life can be hard, and we juggle so many things in life. We juggle mortgages and bringing up kids and family and shopping and work and looking after other people and gardening and DIY. All these things go on, and it sometimes seems like it's pressure upon pressure upon pressure. But if I was to ask you, here's an offer. But here's an offer. I'm going to give you a free house. Yeah. You're going to get 3 meals a day, right? And you won't even have to cook them. They'll be delivered to you. It's a bit like lockdown, really. We'll give you a bit of pocket money. We'll give you a bit of menial, stupid work, and we'll tick a few boxes. And from time to time, we'll let your family come and visit you. You won't have to worry about council tax. You won't have to worry about heating bills. You won't have to worry about lighting bills. Actually, and you'll have all the time in the world to do what you want to do. Wouldn't you jump at that chance? Wouldn't you think, what an offer, where do I sign? Right. But that's kind of what prison's like. And you got to decide, what are you going to make prison work for you? Or what are you going to work for prison? And it gave me the opportunity, really, to sit back and evaluate where I had gone wrong in life. And there was a friend of mine at that time who we had a very, very strong empathy with each other, a strong relationship. And it's important to have people like that with you when you're in prison, because you've always got to have someone who's watching your back, and they need someone that's watching their back. But this guy, and to this day, I am greatly indebted to him. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but I'm greatly indebted to him because he was the first person who started to talk to me about dyslexia. And he was dyslexic, and he saw in me a dyslexia. But one of the things we kind of spent a lot of time doing was we played backgammon. And he could never beat me. He could never beat me because I had this weird ability to count numbers like further down the line and do all the strategy stuff. And when he asked me where I got that skill from, I talked to him about Cuisenaire rods. Here we go, Cuisenaire rods. And he must have thought about this, but one of the things that Willie, God rest him, did, his job in the prison was in a ceramics workshop. Right? And in his kind of spare time and downtime, he created 3D models in ceramics of alphabetical letters, uppercase and lowercase, and he would sneak them out of the workshop and bring them back, and eventually I had all these, and it kind of helped me to distinguish some of the stuff that I was struggling with, and the tutors in the education department really helped me. So I managed to kind of get my reading skills up to a level where I was quite confident to take a newspaper for the first time and actually read it and reread it because I don't always retain what I'm reading is one of the things. But it made me, it opened up a whole new world to me of written word. And along with that, I really enjoyed some of the things that were going on in prison around drama, and that kind of opened up spoken word. And so, to a greater extent, I suppose, I kind of used the time I had to educate myself and rebuild my own self-confidence. But along the way, I managed to get out of addiction, and I managed to think about what I might do once prison was over, because at this point in life I simply didn't want to go back. And you know, I'm going to go aside here, this is off page, but a lot of the work I do nowadays is with people who are leaving prison, and try to support them and help them to reintegrate when they're going back to the communities. And you know what, I don't care what the Daily Mail says, and I hope I'm not offending any Daily Mail readers here, but ignore all this nonsense about Scotland's powder keg jails and Scotland's thugs and violent criminals. Let me tell you, the most frightening part of any prison sentence is when you're coming out, because you don't know what you're coming to. You've been in this bubble. And even though you may have visits and talk to your nearest and dearest and your loved ones, actually you don't have honest conversations during those visits because no one wants to open Pandora's box. So it's a very scary time for people leaving prison. And so the work that I do now is about trying to help people negotiate and navigate that stormy water. And to a man, everyone I've ever supported or worked with in this area of work will say, I don't want to go back. That's me done. I'm never going back to jail. The reality, unfortunately, is that many of them do. And the reason that happens is because the basics have not been sorted out. Right? And so I could meet someone coming out of Berlin tomorrow morning, and take them and give them a house in Mackay and a Jaguar in the driveway and a speedboat on Loch Lomond and start them on a job on Monday morning. And by the time Tuesday or Wednesday comes, they'll have made a total chutz of it and potentially be back in prison. So what we try to do when we're supporting these people is to unpick the problems, right? We don't put sticking plasters on it. If you don't clean a cut, and all we do is put a plaster on it, it'll go poisonous. You've got to clean the cut and you've got to find out what caused it. And so what we do is unpick what are the areas of your life that you really want to improve on. And so many of the people that I work with in that area became detached from education for a variety of reasons. But literacy and numeracy are always a problem. Dyslexia is highly prevalent in people in prisons. And knowing the way I reacted to that isolation in life, I can empathise with these people. So what we're going to try and do is find, if I go back to the Socratic questions, why did this happen? How can I support and help you, and what can I put in place? And when we do things like that for people, they very often move on to better lives. So I feel as if I'm kind of ranting and going off page, but that's what I do. It's probably one of the reasons that Kathy and the team have asked me to have a chat, because you'll see live, well, almost live, virtually, that this is the kind of effect that dyslexia can have on people. It's really important that you unpick causes for people. And so that guy who's misbehaving in class, why? Why? Unpick it. What can you do to help? For that kid who's struggling, they maybe just need that little bit of extra support. And I was very fortunate that when I finally left prison, and I had this laser focus, I ain't going back to prison. Right? What I wanted to do was get a job, right? And that's what everyone tells me when I leave prison. If I get a job, everything will be fine, but it won't be. You've got to deal with what happened in the past. You've got to unpick all that trauma, right? But I managed to get a job as a labourer. And do you know what? I tell you what, I saw an interview that Sir Jackie Stewart did some time ago. And he said, quite frankly, had he not been a 3-time world champion racing driver, he was very good at cleaning windows, you know. So I'm very good at digging holes in the street. You know, if you need a hole dug in the road, I'm your man, and I'm really top notch at getting it filled back in again, because I take a pride in the job and I make sure it's smooth. And, you know, but do you know what? There's not a lot of job satisfaction in that. But eventually, it was brought to my attention a recruitment advert in a newspaper in about 2008, maybe. And I was kind of gobsmacked when I read this advert, because it was saying, the WISE Group, who are my current employers, the WISE Group are setting up a new programme to help people leaving prison. But the real hook for me, because I've never seen anything like this in my life, it said on it, if you have been in prison, or if you've had addiction issues, tick. If you've experienced homelessness, if you've experienced substance misuse, you might be the very person for us. So obviously I had to check the date to make sure it wasn't the 1st of April, right? Because that was my train of thought. But the impact and the power of an advert like that says, do you know all that bad stuff in your life? It's valuable. And we'll place a value on it. And we will take that value and we will harness it and we will make great things happen with it. Anyway, so I applied for the job. And unfortunately, I got there. And I've got these great ideas. I'm off again. The things are going like that. They come from all over. But I want to try and get back just to getting this job. But when I got there, when I finally got started in the place, do you know what? It wasn't what they sold me. They sold me a pup. And within 2 days of starting within that project, I wanted to pack it in. And it was my dream job. And my missus, who's my rock in life, right? Nothing without her. She stuck with me through thick and thin. I couldn't have done it. I'd have been off years and years ago. But she was very practical about it. And she said, you know what? You told me it was your dream job. Hey ho, it ain't. So if you want to go back to digging those holes in the road, because you're really good at digging those holes in the road, then on you go. But tell me why it hasn't turned out to be your dream job. And we unpicked the onion, the why, the how, the where. You know, those questions that I keep referring to, Socratic questions. And the sense that she has, she said, you know what you're explaining to me here is a systemic failure. And if you want to change a system, you have to be inside it. You can't change it from outside. So if you want to change that system, you want to make it better, what you got to do is stay there and work at it. And so I did, and I stayed and I kind of ploughed a lone furrow until such times as I got so fortunate to get a new manager who kind of recognised my issues. And she had a very frank conversation with me that said, your issues we can manage. Your creativity we need to harness, because that's what's going to make the difference. And so what I'm asking people to do is not just look at things in black and white. Don't be bound by what we've been conditioned to think, that the lines we have to follow. And don't be conditioned because of what someone else might think. You know, each and every one of us have got a purpose and we have a value. And we will have a value to wider society if our potential can be realised. I want to put a footnote on this because this is something I'm really proud of. Through the work that I've done in the development of the services that I designed at the WISE Group, I kind of came to the attention of people in Scottish Government. And a couple of years ago, I was approached to see if I'd be interested in going into Scottish Government on a secondment. Oh, really? That's something that would have been beyond my wildest dreams 40 years ago, 50 years ago even. But if some of our senior civil servants can recognise the value of diversity, and that by bringing some diversity into their organisation, they might learn and it might improve some of the policies and the ways that they think, then surely it's for all of us to do the same. It's all of us to seek diversity, not push it away. And just on that, you know, there's a lot of talk about diversity in organisations, you know, and I just want to say, what does that diversity mean to me in organisations? So we all have, well, we've got mission statements on the wall, we've got value statements on the other wall, and we have diversity because that's what we do. But diversity for me is not just about, you know, what your disability may or may not be, or what your sexuality may or may not be, or what the colour of your skin may or may not be. All of those are valuable, and we need that level of diversity. But we also need diversity of thought. And the talented creative people who have that diversity of thought are every bit as valuable to society and to our communities as the financiers, as the bankers, the accountants, the marketeers, the technicians, the engineers. We all have something to contribute.
Hello and welcome back again. Hope you're enjoying the day so far. So we are now about to have a lunch break. Feel free to take a break from your computer, go stretch your legs, have some lunch. If you have any questions for the afternoon Q&A sessions, please email them to kathy@dyslexiascotland.org.uk by 12:30, and then come back at 1 o'clock on Zoom to get involved in that Q&A session. With our morning speakers, Neil Mackay, Yasmine and Suzette Clarke, and Charlie Martin. Our CEO, Kathy, will host that Q&A session later. Then at 1:30, we'll have a COVID-19 forum with Fran Foreman of Education Scotland. She's also the chair of the Addressing Dyslexia Toolkit Working Group. She'll be joined by Maggie Doyle, PT for Support for Learning at the Glasgow Gaelic School, a member of the Addressing Dyslexia Toolkit Working Group. That'll also be hosted by Kathy as well. So enjoy your lunch and see you soon.